We talked this morning about geopolitics and diplomacy, and in the afternoon it's about philanthropy, which is a fairly typical day at Indiaspora, really. But it's all with a common theme and a common thread running through it. The purpose is to, which is Indiaspora's mission, is to inspire the global Indian diaspora to be a force for good and to connect leaders across several countries and various professions with leaders resident in India. So with that, I'd like to invite my my co-panelists over for the fireside chat that we are about to have now, which is about how diaspora philanthropy can benefit India. Can I invite Sumit Dayal? Sumit is the CEO of Give Grants. The organization that is known as Give today was formerly known as Give India. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. And also I'd like to invite Jyotirmoy Chatterjee, fondly known as JC, who is the head of Giving Pie. And Giving Pie sits under the organization known as Dasra, which I'm sure many of you have heard of as well. Thank you, JC. You can sit here, perhaps on this side. Thanks, JC and Sumit, for joining us here today. So let me start the conversation on diaspora philanthropy. Sumit, first of all, with you. Indiaspora and Give are partners in a joint venture which focuses on diaspora philanthropy from America towards India. So if you could start by talking to all our attendees and participants about not only a little bit obviously about Give, but also about the rationale behind the joint venture and what it is that we are focusing on.
Thanks, Sanjeev. I think what the joint venture focuses on, in fact, pretty much everything that Give does and has been doing for 23 years is all directed towards one single purpose. We need to make giving bigger and better. There are enough nonprofits in India doing fabulous work in literally every corner of this country, in literally every single intervention area that you can think of. Be it education, health, livelihoods, climate action. There are new models emerging every day with very, very committed and smart people working on it. Giving is the fuel for all of this work to happen. And our job is to solve that part of the problem. Over the last 23 years, we did that in India. And now with Indiaspora's help and support, we're trying to do that with the Indian diaspora in the US. So that's the ultimate objective. Just to put that in some quantitative context, $25 billion of remittances come from the US to India every year. $500 million out of that is philanthropic giving by individuals. I'm leaving aside foundations and institutional money. Individuals and families in the US giving philanthropic money to India is around $500 million. That's likely to become 3x in the next 7 or 8 years. And the reason simply is that the diaspora has been extremely successful, has created immense wealth, has a strong connect with India. But this whole journey of what it is today to what it can become, which sounds really good, 3x in 7 years is brilliant. It will only happen if folks living in the US find enough trusted, transparent, reliable avenues to give to India, where they know what happens to that money and that money goes and gets used in a way that it creates real impact. And that impact can be visible, again, back to the giver. That's what this joint venture is trying to do. It's trying to take these trusted options to the givers in the US. It's trying to do that in a way that it connects to their philanthropic journey. A large number of them are second generation members of the diaspora. Their connect with India is very different from what their parents might have been. Many of them empathize with causes which are very, very different from what may have been the case 10 years back. Climate action today versus education at a different point in time is a classical example of that choice. So we're trying to do things that solve for each of these and help drive this growth in philanthropy because the need for it is immediate, has always been immediate, and is always there.
Sumit, you talked about trusted channels of giving. I just want to link that back to something that MR said this morning. MR talked about giving during COVID that Indiaspora was engaged in towards India. And indeed, one of the trusted partners that we used at that time was GIVE. This was even before our joint venture was signed, because we are aware of GIVE's reach and its vetting in terms of the partners that you work with here in India. JC, if I can turn to you in the context of Giving Pie. You know, Giving Pie fundamentally is the memorandum of understanding that we have between our organizations is focused on, for now, 3 countries. We are working on the UK, Singapore, and indeed the UAE. But Giving Pie is also fundamentally different than the work that GIVE does, and in certain areas or certain circumstances can be complementary. So why don't you talk a little bit about the rationale for our work together and why these 3 countries?
Well, thank you, Sanjeev, and we're very excited about our partnership with Indiaspora. And I think so, just to respond to that question, I'd like to set a little bit of the context, right? There's this interesting data stat that I kind of came across a few years back, which was published by the UN, which said, at the current rate of progress and funding that's happening in the social impact space, it will take until 2094 to solve for the sustainable development goals, which are supposed to be achieved by 2030. And this data point was pre-COVID. Now let's forget what the actual number is in terms of whether it's 100 years, 90 years, 60 years. The reality is that although there is heightened momentum in terms of social impact, there's an increased need of urgency for us to really accelerate the way we need to solve some of these issues. And in that context, at an overarching level, we believe families are very fundamental to really helping bridge this inequity at large. Why? Because at the end of the day, the country that we see in terms of India today has been built by families, and we believe the power of families can be very catalytic to really solving some of these inequities that are there. And in that context, Giving Pie, what we're trying to do is saying that today there are so many families who are passionately pursuing various philanthropic endeavors, but I would say they're all in silos of excellence. Right? As in, we heard of great example just before us, and there are many, many more. If we really have to solve for any of these issues that are there, no one family can solve for it, and hence we believe that it's super critical that families who are interested about specific issues are able to learn, collaborate with each other, which is not happening to the extent that it should, and that with that intent, we've kind of forged this partnership. So Giving Pie is an invite-only network which brings in families who are already pursuing philanthropy into a common umbrella for us to learn, share, and collaborate between families. And in that context, in the last 1 year, we've kind of have 250 such families who are a part of the network, who annually channelize close to 1,000 crores to the development sector in India. And we've kind of just partnered with Indiaspora to scale it up globally, because we're seeing a lot of diaspora families all interested in different issues, but are also wanting to shape their understanding in terms of these issues based on what's happening in India. And that's where we see that there's a lot of potential of connecting, let's say, families sitting in UK, London, Singapore, and other geographies to families who are addressing these issues in India, because what was said and done, today trust is still deficit globally in terms of the Indian social sector. And we believe that collaboration between families can really be very catalytic to really addressing or accelerating journeys. But then it's also to say, suppose someone is interested in mental health, or for that matter, animal welfare, or for that matter, education, healthcare, can some of these families come together, collectively make that 1 + 1 = 11 sort of network effects in terms of accelerating the impact, right? And that's where both with the families, but also both Giving Pie and Indiaspora leveraging our strengths across these geographies to really bring the power of families to build an India that we all want to aspire for.
A couple of observations, JC. First of all, regarding the trust deficit, several articles have been written about that. Both our organizations here, both your organizations have done work in this area or are doing work. In fact, Indiaspora also did a survey a few years ago about giving from America to India, where we identified the trust deficit as one of the key barriers. It's not surprising instinctively to a lot of people that are sitting here, but I think we have quantifiable data that shows that that is indeed an obstacle that needs to be overcome. I know that we have limited time and we sort of want to keep the trains running on time, but there are a couple of things that I want to bring you both in on very quickly. The first is an area that Sumit, you referred to, which is in terms of the next gen. So the next generation and working with the next gen of the diaspora is one of Indiaspora's priorities. There was a breakout session earlier today, in fact, on that very subject. What is it that we can do, Sumit, I'll bring you in first and then JC. What is it that we can do given the different priorities of the next gen, given that the next gen of the diaspora was not born and raised in India? And by the way, just to be clear, as just to preface this question, one thing I will say is that at Indiaspora, we are strong believers and firm believers that philanthropy and social impact, while we keenly participate on giving towards India and we accelerate and emphasize that, we are also very clear that if the mission of the organization, which is to be a force for good globally, is to be achieved, we are also very keen on encouraging the diaspora to give locally within their own economies, right? So we think both are important. It's not either or. But given that this conversation is focused on giving to India, Sumit, what is it that we can do to make sure that that giving habit towards India continues with the next gen that might have a slightly looser tie with India than did their parents?
I think the way the demographics is working, it's pretty obvious that the future of giving will be increasingly moving in that direction. There are two things that we're doing this year that are, in my view, good examples of what needs to be done. The first is that we are shifting the causes that we are focusing on and creating more and more options in areas like climate action. We are working with highly reputed nonprofits in India and in the US to put together the India Climate Fund that will be working in areas that are just a lot more relevant and connected to the generation that's making those decisions today, right? The second aspect of this is exactly what you just said, Sanjeev, right? It is about giving to the US and giving to India all together. The connect with India is very, very different for the next generation. And we are putting together, it's going to start later in December this year. We are starting to put together groups of college students who would be coming to India and actively engaging with nonprofits that are working in specific areas in India over a 2-week period. These are immersion trips. These are, of course, trips to connect back to India, but more importantly, get a first-hand view of how philanthropy actually happens on the ground. And to do that with organizations that are not necessarily the biggest names, but that are doing fabulous, innovative work, which is ready to scale. The purpose of these trips is not to raise money. The purpose of these trips is to connect and engage with a donor in their philanthropic journey the way they would like to do it. And I think that shift is very, very necessary. We can't just take everything that happens in India and just go and say, now let's raise money for this in the US. That's never going to work. It never worked in India either. So why would it work in the US? It never works in any space. So we need to be engaging with potential donors at their stage of life. These trips, as well as the Climate Fund, as well as creating platforms for Indian nonprofits to be visible in the US, not just as some random name, but as faces, as people, are the three things that I think over the next 6 months you'll see happening, which hopefully moves us along.
Thanks, Sumit. And I should take this opportunity to point out that the CEO of our joint venture between our two organizations is a gentleman named Ashish Shah, who lives in Seattle and who used to formerly work on Indiaspora's philanthropy team. And he has also been, I know, quite instrumental in conceiving some of these ideas that you just talked about. JC, if I can bring you in on the same question. What is it that we can do to make sure that the next gen of the diaspora continues its philanthropic ties with India?
So I think there are a few aspects to this. One is what we're seeing as part of Giving Pies. The way the next generation is thinking about philanthropy is very different from how their parents might have approached philanthropy, both in terms of areas that they are picking, approaches that they are taking. And that's something that we need to acknowledge in terms of the intergenerational shift. Keeping that in mind, there are already next generation philanthropists who are actually doing phenomenal work. So the first thing that we're doing is saying, how do we really kind of connect folks who are already doing great work to folks who are aspirational and want to step up on their journey? And for that, we're kind of creating very bespoke conversations between next generation philanthropists to engage with each other in very intimate settings so that they are able to learn from each other's experiences, one. Second, a feedback that we got from, or an input that we got from several of our members was, we want our children to be kind of far more sensitized to India, to the point even Sumit is making. And in that context, and how do we kind of do that? So we actually partnered with Stanford PAX and launched something called as the Young Philanthropist Program to really kind of give an immersive program for kids of Giving Pie members to really get a deep dive understanding of philanthropy. So that's the second thing. Third is, I think, so we need to talk a lot more about good work that's happening. I think so today, why did people give a lot during COVID? Why? Because it was in the front, front page of all leading newspapers, and everyone knew about the issues, and that's why it raised the urgency. I think so there's a lot of good work happening. I think so if we are able to kind of showcase the good work of some of these next generation philanthropists to create relatable role models. Because when you are a next generation philanthropist, you're saying, okay, whom can I relate to? One is, whom do you respect? And second, whom do I relate to in terms of inspiration? And I think so we need a new breed of role models as next generation philanthropists and really make them like the influencers and champions. Nikhil Kamath, who is the latest Giving Pledge signatory, is like, today celebrities, say Bollywood stars or cricketers, are all celebrities when they kind of really contribute to nation building in their own ways. Why aren't philanthropists also kind of made to showcase a lot of work and become celebrities in a certain shape and form, and that to inspire many others? So there are different pathways, but I think so it needs a lot of the playbook to unlock this is a playbook that has not been tried before. And I think so we need to say, what will it take to reimagine some of these approaches to kind of solving for this problem?
Right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, JC, and not about the next gen specifically, but I think it's worth mentioning that one of Indiaspora's board members who spoke this morning, Rajan Navani, is one of the key champions of the Giving Pie idea and the network here in India. So that's further inspiration for our understanding that we have between our organizations. Second and last question in the, I guess, 2 or 3 minutes that we have left. This conference is about the journey towards India at 100. So what is it you think that diaspora philanthropy can do? Both of you, I'll turn to JC first this time and then to Sumit. What is it that you think that diaspora can do to accelerate impact, and measurable outcomes in this journey towards India at 100? Specific sectors, thoughts?
So I think so few pointed inputs on this. One, I think so there is a need to look at long-term investments in whichever sector you look at. I think so the moment you're looking at it with a 1 year, 2 year lens, you're not solving any issues. As in, you might get the joy of doing something in that context, but I think so to solve some of these issues, we need to take a longer-term bet towards kind of solving any issues. Second, I think so there needs to be increased risk appetite to kind of really fund innovations to really accelerate social impact, and how can philanthropy really become the risk capital for solving problems. Third is, I think so we need diaspora giving to be more catalytic, right? And I think Sumit and we were chatting very recently, it's like, if you have that quantum of money, you can never become the government, to what Ashish was saying, like government is the key and biggest NGO in the country. So how do you have philanthropic capital to actually become catalytic capital, which can actually unlock non-linear scale, right? And that is, I think, so important. Fourth, I think so we need to kind of diaspora philanthropy to pick up underserved causes, underserved causes, regions, and communities, right? These three which are underfunded, how can we have increased funding towards this? So I think so these are the few points. And I think so as we look at India at 100 today, what is the use of AI, machine learning, all of this? And I think so what we need to say is by 2047, as a country, we will actually not incrementally take some steps, but actually eradicate and solve for some of these issues. And I think so we need to kind of really look at it as a momentum and a movement as families, as all stakeholders to really resolve for that. Because let's be clear, at the current pace, we are not solving it, and that's why the urge is each of us need to step up and say, no, this is time critical, and let's do the best we can, and over there, all of us need to work together. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, JC. I do see the time up board, but I definitely want to bring you in, Sumit, on this as well. So if you could provide us with your brief thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, and I'll keep the time up board in mind. In my view, it's actually very straightforward. When we're looking at India at 100, poverty and climate action are the two pillars at whose intersection the answer finally lies. This is what needs to be solved for. All of private philanthropy in India is 3% of what the government spends. So it's never going to replace it, right? I think Ashish would have probably delivered the same message exactly before this. So what is it that this 3% does that's going to make that remaining 97% move? That's going to be innovation. That's going to be testing out new models, which the government cannot do. Private philanthropy does that. Especially diaspora private philanthropy can do that very, very well, because it also comes with a strong set of networks, comfort with technology, and a willingness to take that risk. That's where we would love to see most of the diaspora philanthropy getting concentrated, not to fund just another building, not to fund just another program, not to fund just another extension, but to fund creation of new models, which can then be adopted and implemented at scale. There is no other way that in the next 25 years we can move the meter unless somebody takes the risk. It's no different from venture capital in a sense. Someone has to take that first risk for the rest of the world to follow.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Sumit. Thanks, JC. Really enjoyed this conversation. Maybe we can do a quick picture with our partner organizations. Come. Thank you. One last. Thank you. Thanks a lot.